Okay, picture this. Imagine a world where centuries of profound knowledge, massive, sprawling universities, and entire lineages of thought are just vanishing, like completely wiped off the map. Well, that was the grim absolute reality for Indian Buddhism back in the late 16th century. And standing between that rapidly disappearing world and total historical oblivion, one exceptionally brilliant scholar who is working tirelessly to save the whole shebang. This explainer is all about that man, Taranatha, and how he essentially became a human time capsule, preserving an entire civilization's intellectual heritage. So, what actually happens when a civilization loses its history? Seriously, think about it for a second. It's a massive cultural tragedy. We're not just talking about misplaced books or some forgotten dates here. We're talking about the permanent erasure of centuries of philosophy, intense debates, and an incredibly vibrant culture. In India at this time, Buddhism had largely declined, and its physical footprint was literally disappearing into the earth. The stakes? They couldn't have been higher. If someone didn't step up and fast to record it, an entire epic of human intellectual achievement was just going to be lost to the sands of time. Okay, let's dive into this. There is this massive geographical and cultural shift happening during this era. It's kind of like a giant tectonic plate shifting, but for culture. On one side, you have India experiencing the truly tragic destruction of its once great Buddhist universities. These were places of immense learning, which resulted in a severe decline of knowledge. But then on the other side, you have Tibet stepping up to the plate to become the new protector and preserver of surviving Sanskrit literature. Tibet basically became the vault, a massive cultural safe, where India's spiritual memory was relocated and kept secure. Section 1. Enter Taranatha, the intellectual prodigy. While a lot of other scholars were focused purely on local Tibetan matters, this young prodigy, well, he had his eyes set southward, right on the vast, disappearing intellectual landscape of India. Let's trace his timeline, starting in 1575 with his birth as Kundaga Sningpo, which, by the way, translates to Anandagarbha in Sanskrit. We see an incredibly rapid progression. During his early life, he didn't just study the basic texts. No, he achieved absolute mastery over Sanskrit and Tantra, literally soaking up information from passing travelers and any surviving manuscripts he could get his hands on. And this relentless obsessive study, it led directly to his monumental writing phase, specifically authoring his famous History of Buddhism in India. He passed away in 1634, but his story actually didn't end there. Post-death, his legacy lived on, with followers believing he reincarnated as the great Mongolian leader Zanabazar. It is just an incredible trajectory, right? From a bright, curious kid to a revered cultural savior. And because of this lifelong, absolute dedication, modern scholars have bestowed upon him a really profound title, the Herodotus of Tibetan Buddhism. Now, Herodotus, as you might know, is known as the father of history in the Western world. So by giving Taranatha this title, scholars are acknowledging how he uniquely bridged the gap between ancient Indian civilization and Tibetan Buddhism. He wasn't just sitting there copying old texts, he was actively acting as the great historian of an entire fading era, a real game changer. Which brings us to Section 2, the great masterpiece, his History of Buddhism in India. Listen, I literally cannot stress this enough. Without this single crucial document, our understanding of late Indian Buddhism would be incredibly fractured today. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer breathtaking scope of the lost history he managed to document and categorize. He didn't just write some broad, vague overview. He got deeply, deeply specific. He detailed the monastic systems of massive universities, places like Nalanda, Vikramashila, and Odontapuri. He meticulously recorded the biographies of legendary teachers like Nagarjuna, Asanga, and Vasubandhu. He even mapped out the geography of Buddhism's spread across Magadha, Bengal, and Kashmir. And crucially, he chronicled the decline, detailing the political instability, the invasions, and the destruction that led to the fall of these institutions. He basically created a highly detailed encyclopedia of a vanishing world. So how exactly did he pull this off in the late 16th century? Well, through an incredibly rigorous, proto-modern historical method. First, he actively went out and gathered oral traditions and translated Sanskrit sources. Second, he meticulously recorded teacher lineages just to verify the flow of information. Third, he cross-referenced all these accounts with pilgrim records. And fourth, he organized the whole thing into a cohesive chronological history. Now, yes, actually, full disclosure, he did occasionally mix in some legends and miraculous stories. But hey, that was totally standard for historians of his time. Despite that, his systematic approach was incredibly advanced, and it provides a factual framework that even modern scholars rely on today. Moving to section 3, guarding the sacred texts, a crucial clarification. Okay, I want to pivot here with some high energy because we really need to bust a major historical myth. When you start researching Taranatha, you are constantly going to see his name attached to the greatest, most massive Buddhist canonical collections in existence. It's a major point of confusion for a lot of people, so we are going to clarify exactly what his role was in guarding these sacred texts. First off, we really need to understand the immense gravity of the texts we're talking about here. The Kangyur translates to the translated words of the Buddha. This massive collection contains the sutras, the Vinaya, and the tantras. We are talking about the direct, holy teachings of the Buddha himself. It is absolutely one of the most sacred foundational collections in Tibetan Buddhism. It commands total reverence. And right alongside it, you have the Tangyur, or Tengyur. This translates to the translated treatises. This collection contains all the extensive commentaries written by brilliant Indian Buddhist scholars, logicians, and philosophers, heavy-hitting thinkers like Nagarjuna and Dharmakirti. Both the Kangyur and the Tengyur are these massive, centuries-in-the-making collections that form the absolute bedrock of all Tibetan Buddhist scholarship. So the crucial point is, Taranatha did not originally write or compile the entire Kangyur and Tengyur, no way. That is a huge misconception. Taranatha's true role was that he studied these texts deeply, he preserved their traditions, he transmitted their knowledge, he actively supported textual preservation, and he encouraged widespread scholarship based on them. He was, without a doubt, their ultimate champion. So while he didn't write them from scratch, his obsessive, lifelong preservation efforts inextricably linked his name to these holy collections forever. Section 4. An enduring legacy, philosophy, and beyond. You see, Taranatha wasn't just a historian or a glorified librarian. His legacy goes way beyond just cataloging the past. He was a major, highly vocal defender of the Jonang school of Tibetan Buddhism, a highly advanced Kalachakra tantric master, and a profoundly influential religious leader in his own right. He was actively shaping the future of Buddhism while simultaneously guarding its past. And this brilliantly illustrates his complex philosophical views. Taranatha strongly supported what's known as the Shentong philosophy. Basically, it posits that ultimate reality is empty of illusion, meaning it's completely free from conventional false concepts, but crucially, it is not empty of enlightened qualities. This really nuanced, brilliant distinction sparked major, highly intellectual debates within Tibetan Buddhism, and it firmly established Taranatha not just as a passive recorder of old ideas, but as a dynamic, original thinker defending a controversial and profound doctrine. And his impact didn't even stop at the Tibetan border. Taranatha's influence expanded massively into Mongolia. Like we touched on earlier, after his death, it was widely believed that he reincarnated as Zana Bazar, who became the first Jebsen Damba Hututu. Zana Bazar was this towering figure, a deeply venerated artist, scholar, and religious leader in Mongolian Buddhism. Through this extraordinary connection, Taranatha's legacy just leaped across geographic borders, literally shaping the spiritual landscape of an entirely different nation long after his physical life had ended. So let's summarize the true weight of this guardian's impact. He preserved an Indian intellectual history that, for sure, would have been completely annihilated otherwise. He saved lost tantric traditions. He acted as the vital, living bridge between ancient India and Tibet. And, maybe most practically for us today, he left behind indispensable historical records that are literally still used by modern archaeologists right now to locate ancient sites. Without this one monk's staggering dedication, a huge portion of world history would simply not exist for us today. Which brings us to a final, powerful thought to leave you with. Without guardians of history like Taranatha, how much of today's world would simply vanish tomorrow? Seriously, it really makes you reflect on the extreme fragility of human history. The knowledge, the culture, the art, the ideas we just take for granted every day, it all only survives if someone actually cares enough to preserve it. Taranatha cared, and because he did, an entire vanishing world was saved. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what parts of our world are worth preserving today.